8. What is the education system like? This is a super important question that we're being asked by our clients who have children. And this is important because education is everything. So oftentimes people ask, should I send my kids to a private school or public school? We're being asked this question a lot in Paraguay, in Argentina, and some other countries. And people really want to know, are public schools good enough, or do I need to send my kids to a private school to receive, a similar level of education? What I want to say here is that you really need to observe this, and it's based on the country and what do your kids get back home now, and how satisfied are you with the education they get? Another important thing is that sometimes people are worried about sending their kids to a public or private school because they might get bullied. This is actually very common, not just in developed countries, but also in developing countries, where kids get bullied a lot, especially if they go to a very fancy international school where there are tons and tons of rich kids. They tend to do this very often. I've heard this in certain schools in South America. Even in South America. And of course, this is also the case in America and Europe, everywhere. So you really want to have a look at this. As always, private schools are a lot more expensive than public schools. Sometimes public schools can be almost completely free for your kids, and sometimes even for you too. You want to ask, what are the costs and enrollment requirements for your children? And it's always good to get a few quotes, talk to a couple of schools so you can compare. Don't just get a quote from one school and be like, oh, this is going to be the average. No, go to other schools, talk to them, and then see how the schools compare. 9. What is the political and safety stability? This is so important, and it is downplayed by so many people, unbelievably downplayed. It is a super important question. Geopolitics play a big role for everyone, and everyone should consider geopolitics before moving to a new country. You don't want to move to a new country, that's in a war zone. You don't want that. Neither do you want to move to a region or country where war is imminent. There are a lot of places like this, unfortunately. You want to really look at the whole picture and ask yourself, is the geopolitical situation in the new country and region in alignment with what I want to get out of life? And then, of course, what is the crime rate like? Here again, you can use online statistics, which may not be accurate for a number of reasons. Oftentimes, like petty crime is underreported in developing countries. The law enforcement authorities don't take it seriously. They just don't get paid enough to worry about these little and seemingly insignificant crimes, even though they're not insignificant. A crime is a crime. That often these crimes don't end up being added to the crime statistic of a country. We had seen videos by competitors of ours that talked about how safe Eastern European countries are, not knowing that a lot of the crimes are actually not being added to the index. They're not even reported, and the crime that's not reported can never enter the index. So as a rule of thumb, okay, this is a matter of fact. Developed countries, first world countries, have just a much better and more realistic crime index, have much more reliable statistics than developing countries, especially developing countries where law enforcement is very thin, okay? And there are a lot of them everywhere. In Asia, in Latin America, in Africa, in Eastern Europe. There are a lot of places where law enforcement is close to not existing. And because of this fact, a lot of the crime never gets to enter the index. How you can solve this dilemma is by again talking to locals and talking to expats who live in the region. They will tell you what the crime is really like, what the crime rates are really like. They will tell you about the bad neighborhoods to avoid. Maybe in a certain street people are 15 times more likely to get mugged than in the next street in the same neighborhood. So there are a lot of things that you want to consider, and again, first-hand experience is much more valuable than statistics you can see online. When it comes to emerging countries, this is very, very, very accurate. 10. How easy is it to integrate socially? I know we have talked about language barrier and cultural differences, but really ask yourself this question. How easy is it to integrate in the new country? Are you accepted as a foreigner? And something that's also very important that you should ask is my ethnicity accepted in the new country? This is super important. It's almost a forbidden topic to talk about because it does get a lot of public criticism. However, ethnicity may or may not be important when it comes comes to integrating in a new country. But please ask yourself this question to avoid any unpleasant surprises. 11. What are the housing options? Now, another important point, of course. I mean, how easy is it to rent an apartment? What are the requirements for renting an apartment? Do you need to have a work contract? Do you need to show your salary slips? Must you have residency? There are so many questions you need to answer, and there is a legal code for renting an apartment in a country, and you want to inform yourself about the whole procedure. What are the minimum deposit requirements like? Do they ask for half a month deposit, for 1 month deposit, for 2 months deposit? Some countries, believe it or not, they ask you for 6 months deposit, or 6 months upfront, or even 12 months upfront. Let me give an example where this is very prevalent in Spain, and it's never been like this in Spain to rent an apartment now. And if you're foreign, a lot of the times landlords want to get either all the money upfront. Let's say you want to rent for a year, they want 12 months upfront, or they want to get a 6-month deposit. I had seen such people asking for everything up front. It's very, very normal. Now, not every person is like that. However, because of the terrible eviction laws that are currently in place in Spain, where you can pretty much live in an apartment and let's say you have a baby, it's very hard to kick out that person. It's just a matter of fact. So people have to be aware. I mean, landlords have to be aware of this law to protect themselves against crime and against abuse, because the government's not doing it. Also in Dubai, if you want to rent an apartment, you have to maybe pay a lot up front or a lot deposit. There are a lot of places like that now where landlords just want more because the law is maybe not in their favor. I'm not saying that's the case in the UAE. I think in the UAE it's something completely different, but I'm just saying in Spain and in some other European Union countries, it's pretty crazy to rent an apartment now, where you have to just pay a lot deposit. In Austria too, you have to pay a lot of deposit to rent an apartment. On the other hand, in certain Latin American countries where I've been to, like in Mexico, I was able to rent an apartment without putting down any deposit. Nobody asked me for a deposit. Nobody asked me for my work contract or salary slips, nothing. I just rented the apartment. I found it on Airbnb. We made a deal and it was just a handshake. There was no written contract or anything. I got the keys to the apartment and to the edificio, and that was it. It always depends. 12. What are the legal implications of moving? Are there any specific unpleasant legal laws that you should be aware of? What are the employment rights in that country? In some countries, if you've been employed, you are eligible to receive bonuses, vacation time, all kinds of benefits, like for instance, healthcare. You must be enrolled in all these programs for the company to hire you. And should they break any of these laws, any of these legislations, then the company may be in for a lot of trouble. This is very important if you want to move abroad. For instance, in the European Union, in many countries, people are eligible for up to 5 weeks vacation per year. In the United States, it's a lot less than 5 weeks. In fact, it's about, I think, 11 days that you're eligible to get once you have worked for the company for a certain amount of time, right? You may get up to, I think, 11 days. In Paraguay, it's actually quite similar too. You are supposed to give your employees vacation time and paid time off. In Paraguay, they also have the 13th salary, right? So it's an extra salary that the person gets, but only if they have worked for the company for a certain amount of time. They'll be eligible to get that special bonus. What are your rights as a resident and foreigner? This is super important because in a lot of countries, how it works is that a resident and citizen, they don't have the same rights. There are very few countries, if any, where a resident has the same rights as a citizen. In some countries, if you just stay a resident and you're out of the country for a certain amount of time, the government may revoke your residency because they think, or they might think that you have broken your residency status by spending too much time abroad. The United States is such a country. In other countries, you cannot own land. Unless you're a citizen, you cannot own land. You can only own condominiums. In other countries, you cannot own guns unless you're a citizen. So there are a lot of things to consider. Also for company ownership, there are certain countries like Thailand where a foreigner can only own up to 49% of a local company, meaning the other 51% must be owned by a Thai person. Unless you're an American in Thailand, because Americans can own 100% of a Thai company. It's a twisted double standard that's going on in a lot of different places because citizens of certain emerging countries, when they come to Western countries, they can own 100% of real estate. They can own commercial real estate, they can own land, they can own houses, they can own condominiums, they can own 100% of the company that's incorporated there. But then if the same person from that country would go to their native country in the emerging country, they could not own the same things that the emerging person could own in the developed country. Now, this double standard developed mostly because of colonization in the past, and because of past colonization, a lot of countries just have become more mindful and careful about who they give land to. 13. What is the impact on your personal life? How will this move affect your work? How will this move affect your life's trajectory? This is important. Like all these questions, ask yourself these questions, because when you move to a new country, a lot of things will change. People don't believe this. They think like, oh, everything will be like back home. I'm going to have the same relationships. I'm going to have the same daily routine. It's going to be the same pace and everything. No, it's not. It's going to be very different, and oftentimes it's going to be drastically different than what you're accustomed to, especially if you move to another continent where cultural norms are completely different, where the whole environment is different, where maybe you don't have access to public transportation. You have to own a car, or you have to use Ubers, whatever it is. You have to jump on your bike to get to work. So many variables are in place that affect your personal life in the new country. What is the availability of goods and services? This is a super important question. A lot of the times people don't consider this. There are countries where electronic items are super expensive because of import taxes, geography, tons of other reasons, right? But generally import duties, they make it a lot more expensive to purchase certain electronic items in, say, maybe Asian countries, maybe Latin American countries, African countries, because there's just a lot of tax on it, because the people who can afford these electronic items, they're typically, doing very well financially, so the governments just tax them more because they don't have too many other methods of generating revenue. And so a lot of the times we don't consider this. And when this is the case, when electronic items are just too expensive, whenever there's a high tax or high markup, whatever it may be good to purchase these electronic items overseas and bring them with you into the country. But then you may have to pay an import tax. Unless you're a resident, you may be excluded from paying an import tax on certain items, right? So there's so many caveats to consider. Of course, can you find similar products? Let's say beauty products. If you're a woman and you want to move abroad, can you find the same makeup? Can you find the same lipstick? Can you find the same, I don't know what. There are just so many items that you may need on a daily basis that maybe you cannot purchase in the new country, and you have to bring these things with you. Maybe have a relative ship them over. There are many questions you need to ask yourself. And of course, how reliable is internet? The internet is everything these days, especially if you make money online, especially if your business or your work, your employment is dependent on the internet. You want to know whether the internet is good enough for you to work online, and if not, maybe it's going to be hard. You want to ask yourself, are there many brownouts, blackouts in the region? So many questions you want to ask, and if the internet is super important to you, then I had put this right on top of your priority list, because it will exclude a lot of the destinations you may like worldwide. Last but not least, what is the climate and environment like? Are there many natural disasters happening in the region? This is super important. I had seen people who moved to the Philippines and they didn't know about the typhoons that were happening. For instance, when I was in Cebu and I was having some drinks at a rooftop bar with a friend of mine, there was an earthquake, and I was on my second or third drink, and he looked at me like this and he was like, "You didn't feel this?" And I was like, "No, I didn't. What happened?" And he was like, "There was an earthquake. You didn't feel it? You didn't feel it?" I'm like, "No, I didn't feel it." But anyway, that was kind of funny. It does happen, right? Or if you live in a place like Puerto Rico, there are hurricanes, there's all kinds of natural disasters happening in Asia, the Caribbean, in a lot of different places. Maybe it's a tsunami. If you live someplace in Japan, some other places in Asia, maybe there are all kinds of things happening that you want to be aware of. And of course, also the climate. What's the climate like? Can you handle high temperatures? Do you want cold climate? And if yes, which countries would be more suitable for me? Because there are certain people that only want to live in cold climates. Other people hate cold weather. They like hot weather only. So it's very important that you consider all of this. Have you experienced any of these problems when moving abroad? If you're interested in obtaining a residence permit in Latin America or Europe, please contact us. We would love to work with you. Thank you so much for watching Nomad Elite. We appreciate you, and we see you on the next video.